Donald Trump has been re-elected as President of the United States in a landslide victory. The American people have spoken. The liberal media is furious. In a last-ditch effort to humiliate Trump's administration, they invite First Lady Melania Trump for a primetime, live TV ambush. They believe they can break her, embarrass her, and make her regret standing by Donald Trump. But tonight, Melania doesn't just hold her ground. She destroys them. Ethan Wallace sat back in his chair, a practiced smirk curling on his lips as he surveyed his guest. The audience, filled with carefully chosen liberals who adored his sharp wit and relentless takedowns, waited with bated breath. Tonight was meant to be his crowning achievement, a viral masterpiece that would cement his reputation as the liberal media's golden boy. Across from him sat Melania Trump, First Lady of the United States, whose husband, Donald Trump, had just shocked the world with an overwhelming re-election victory. The media had spent years painting her as nothing more than an accessory to Donald's polarizing presidency, and Ethan was determined to make that narrative stick. First Lady Melania Trump, Ethan began, his voice dripping with faux respect. "It's an honor to have you here tonight." His tone carried the unspoken implication that he didn't mean a word of it. Melania inclined her head slightly, her face calm and composed. She had seen this kind of performance many times before. Ethan's smug demeanor, the glint in his eye that revealed he thought he had already won, did nothing to faze her. Ethan leaned forward, clasping his hands together as though settling into an intimate conversation. "You've been in the public eye for many years now," he began smoothly. "People admire your beauty, your poise, your quiet elegance. But let's address what many are thinking. Your critics say that's all there is to you. That your only real accomplishment is being married to Donald Trump. Tell me, how does it feel to live in his shadow?" The audience chuckled, a few outright laughed. Ethan had landed his first jab. The trap was set, the bait laid out. Melania was supposed to flinch, to stammer, to fumble her way into confirming what they all believed, that she was nothing more than a trophy wife standing behind a powerful man. But Melania didn't flinch. She didn't stammer. She didn't even blink. Instead, she smiled, a small, measured smile that conveyed an unshakable confidence. She waited just long enough for the laughter to fade, for the audience to realize she wasn't rattled in the slightest. "You ask this question as if marriage and loyalty are weaknesses," she said, her voice smooth, steady, and tinged with just enough amusement to make it clear she wasn't intimidated. "In my world, standing by your husband and your country is strength. Do you disagree?" The audience fell silent. Ethan's smirk froze on his face. The laughter that had filled the studio just moments ago evaporated. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the room. Melania had not only deflected the insult but turned it back on Ethan, forcing him to either agree with her or admit his own bias. Ethan's smirk faltered for just a moment before he forced a chuckle, leaning back in his chair as though unimpressed. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "of course family is important, but surely you can see why some might think." "Think what?" Melania interrupted, her tone as calm and unbothered as ever. "That a woman should only be celebrated if she is against her husband? That strength only comes in opposition, not in unity." Ethan's jaw tightened. This was not how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be on the defensive, scrambling to justify herself. Instead, she had flipped the conversation entirely, making him, and by extension, the audience, question the premise of his insult. The tension in the room was palpable. Ethan's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel, and the audience could feel it. He let out a small, forced laugh, shaking his head as though amused. "It's just that compared to other first ladies, Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, you've taken a much quieter approach. Don't you think the American people deserve to hear more from you?" Melania tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, though the faintest glimmer of amusement danced in her eyes. She didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of his question hang in the air. It was a tactic she had learned from her husband, Make them wait, make them uncomfortable. Finally, she spoke. Quiet is not the same as weak, she said simply. A murmur spread through the audience. This was not the answer they had expected. It was brief, to the point, and carried a quiet power that was impossible to dismiss. When you are truly strong, Melania continued, you do not need to shout for people to listen. That is why my husband rebuilt this country, and that is why I stand beside him. The murmurs grew louder, scattered applause rippling through the crowd. Ethan shifted in his seat, his confidence visibly faltering. Well, he said, clearing his throat again, I think people just want to understand you more. I mean, you're married to one of the most powerful men in the world. That must come with its challenges. There it was, another subtle jab, another attempt to paint her as a silent bystander in her own life, trapped in a marriage she had no control over. But Melania didn't waver. Power comes with challenges, she agreed, her tone unbothered. But real power is knowing who you are and what you stand for. My husband and I both know exactly who we are. Ethan blinked. He had tried to paint her as a passive figure in Donald Trump's shadow, but instead, she had aligned herself with her husband in a way that was not defensive but assertive. She wasn't just standing by Donald, she was standing with him. The audience sensed it too. The smug amusement that had filled the room at the start of the interview had dissipated, replaced by an uneasy respect. Ethan had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. He forced another laugh, though it sounded weaker this time, more forced. Of course, he said, waving a hand as though dismissing the point. But you've been by President Trump's side through everything, scandals, controversies, criticism. Do you ever question your loyalty? Do you ever wonder if standing by him has cost you your own identity? The audience leaned forward, sensing this was his big moment. This was the question that was supposed to make headlines, to create the viral soundbite that would dominate the news cycle. But Melania didn't pause. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even blink. You ask this as if loyalty is something to be ashamed of, she said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough steel to cut through the tension in the room. That is a very liberal way of thinking. The audience reacted before Ethan could. A mixture of gasps and scattered applause rippled through the crowd. She had said it so simply, so casually, but it was a direct hit. Ethan's smirk was gone now. He had to force himself to keep smiling, but the tension in his posture was obvious. He could feel the eyes on him, the shift in energy. The First Lady of the United States had just called out liberal hypocrisy on live television, and he had no way to spin it. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and for the first time that night, Ethan Wallace wasn't in control. Ethan Wallace shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His first attempt to corner Melania Trump had not gone as planned. She had deflected his jabs with ease, turning them back on him in a way that made him look like the petty antagonist. He forced a smile, trying to mask his irritation. The audience wasn't laughing anymore, and the control he thought he had was slipping away. He needed to push harder. He leaned in slightly, his tone softening in a calculated attempt to sound empathetic, but the condescension was unmistakable. You've stood by your husband through scandals, criticism, and backlash, he said, carefully choosing his words to sound less accusatory than they were. Don't you ever regret being so loyal to him? The audience went quiet, sensing the tension. Ethan knew what he was doing. He wanted to plant a seed of doubt, to make her question herself, her marriage, and her role. He wanted the headlines to read, Melania admits regret over Trump. Melania didn't react immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch, her calm demeanor unnerving Ethan as the seconds ticked by. When she finally spoke, her voice was as steady and poised as ever, but there was a sharpness to it that cut through the air. You speak about loyalty as if it's something to regret, she said. Her gaze remained fixed on him, her tone unwavering. That is why your side doesn't understand commitment. My husband and I share a partnership built on love and respect, not convenience. That is strength. The room seemed to shift. Scattered applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing louder. Ethan's confidence wavered. He hadn't expected her to answer so directly, so decisively. She wasn't defensive or apologetic. She was proud. But Melania wasn't finished. She straightened her posture, her voice gaining a subtle but unmistakable edge. He has faced challenges no leader should face, and I am proud to stand by him. But let me be clear, I am not here because of him. I am here because I choose to be. The applause grew louder, the audience starting to shift away from Ethan's side. He adjusted his tie, trying to appear unfazed, but the cracks in his composure were beginning to show. He hadn't just failed to force a wedge between Melania and Donald. He had given her the perfect opening to display her independence and loyalty in equal measure. Ethan forced another laugh, but it sounded strained now. He had to regain control. He decided to shift the narrative, aiming for a different angle, one that would portray her as passive and ineffective compared to other first ladies. "You've been far less vocal than Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama," he said, his voice tinged with mock concern. "Why haven't you used your platform to make a bold statement?" The question hung in the air, dripping with implication. Ethan wanted her to stumble, to admit that she hadn't lived up to the expectations set by her predecessors. He wanted to paint her as silent, insignificant, a first lady who had failed to make an impact. But Melania didn't stumble. Instead, she smirked, a small, knowing smirk that made Ethan's forced confidence crumble just a little more. "Being loud is not the same as being strong," she said, her voice calm but firm. The words landed with precision, cutting through the tension in the room. Ethan blinked, caught off guard once again, but Melania didn't give him a chance to recover. "Strength is knowing when to speak and when to act," she continued. "My husband's actions speak louder than any words, and so do mine." The audience murmured in agreement, a ripple of acknowledgement passing through the room. Ethan shifted uncomfortably again, but Melania wasn't done. She leaned forward slightly, her tone softening but remaining resolute. "Through my work with children, military families, and global charities, I have done what matters, not what makes headlines." The applause returned, louder this time, and Ethan knew he was losing them. His attempt to diminish her role had backfired spectacularly. She had not only defended herself but also reminded everyone watching of the substantive work she had done, work that often went unnoticed by a media more interested in scandal than substance. Ethan's confidence was slipping fast, but Melania's wasn't. She saw the opportunity to take control of the narrative entirely, and she seized it. "This administration has rebuilt America," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "It has brought back jobs, made this country stronger, and given hope to millions of Americans. That is why they re-elected my husband. Not because of words, but because of results." The audience broke into applause again, some of them even standing this time. The tide had turned completely. Melania wasn't just holding her ground anymore. She was commanding the room. Ethan sat frozen for a moment, his smirk long gone. He knew he was losing, but he couldn't let it end like this. He needed to regain control, to land one final blow that could salvage his narrative. But as he looked across the stage at Melania, poised and unshakable, he realized he was running out of moves. Melania, on the other hand, was just getting started. Ethan Wallace was sweating now. The thin veneer of smug confidence he'd worn since the start of the interview had cracked. Melania Trump had turned every one of his attacks back on him with an elegance and precision that left him grasping for control. His attempts to paint her as passive, insignificant, or overshadowed by her husband had failed spectacularly. The audience, once primed to laugh at her expense, now sat on edge, their respect for the First Lady growing with each passing moment. But Ethan wasn't ready to give up. His entire reputation as a liberal provocateur depended on creating a viral moment. And so far, the only headlines coming out of this interview would be about how badly he was losing. He needed something big, something bold, something cruel. He leaned forward, his tone softening in what he thought was a calculated move, as if he were about to offer her an intimate, honest question. But there was a sharp edge to his voice, a glint of desperation in his eyes. "Let's be honest, Melania," he said, the smirk creeping back onto his face like a mask he no longer wore comfortably. "You're a beautiful woman, and your husband, well, he's older. Have you ever thought about trading up?" The studio went dead silent. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even Ethan's supporters looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. This wasn't a clever jab. This was a direct, personal attack on her marriage, her loyalty, her dignity. Melania didn't react immediately. She sat perfectly still, her expression calm and unreadable. The silence stretched, the weight of Ethan's question hanging in the air like a stone. The longer she waited, the more uncomfortable Ethan became. He shifted in his chair, his confidence visibly eroding under the pressure of her unflinching gaze. Finally, Melania leaned forward slightly, her hands resting gracefully on her lap. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured, and devastatingly sharp. "You've just exposed what your side truly believes," she said, her accent crisp, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. Ethan's smirk vanished. "You think loyalty is weakness," she continued, her tone unwavering. "You think relationships are disposable. And you think a woman's worth is in her appearance. That is why you will never understand me, my marriage, or the millions of Americans who value love, family, and commitment." The audience erupted into applause. It wasn't polite or hesitant. It was thunderous, a wave of approval that swept through the room and left Ethan visibly shaken. Some audience members stood, clapping and cheering, their voices rising over the din. Ethan opened his mouth, trying to interject, but Melania wasn't finished. She leaned back slightly, her posture as composed and regal as ever, her voice gaining strength with each word. "My husband is a fighter," she said, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. "He has rebuilt this country, stood up to its enemies, and given hope to millions. I stand by him because I love him, because I respect him, and because he is the greatest leader this country has ever had." The applause grew louder, the audience now fully on her side. Ethan looked pale, visibly sweating under the lights as he fumbled with his cue cards, desperate to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely out of his hands. "And let me tell you something else," Melania said, her voice rising just enough to command attention over the applause. "Real strength is standing by your family, your marriage, and your country, especially when it's hard. That is what Americans value. That is what I value. And that is why I stand by my husband." The audience exploded again, louder than before. People were on their feet now, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. Ethan sat frozen, his face flushed with embarrassment, his carefully rehearsed facade shattered. He tried to backtrack, stammering as he attempted to change the subject. "Well, I think..." But Melania cut him off, her voice calm but commanding. "No, let's finish this," she said, silencing him with a single glance. "America is strong because of families like ours. And families like ours are strong because we value love, loyalty, and commitment, not convenience." The audience gave her a standing ovation. The noise was deafening, the energy in the room electric. Ethan looked as though he wanted to disappear. The producers, likely panicking in the control room, quickly cut to commercial, but it was far too late. The damage was done. Within hours, clips of the interview flooded social media. Melania's responses, her calm demeanor, and her powerful defense of her marriage and her husband went viral. Conservatives celebrated her as a symbol of grace, strength, and loyalty, while even some liberals admitted that she had completely dismantled Ethan Wallace's attempts to undermine her. Ethan, on the other hand, became a laughingstock. His sponsors began pulling out the next day, his ratings plummeted, and within weeks, he was quietly removed from his primetime slot. The liberal media tried to spin the narrative, but the footage of Melania's takedown was undeniable. Meanwhile, Melania Trump's popularity soared. She was hailed as a first lady who embodied dignity and loyalty, a woman who had faced relentless criticism and attacks with grace and strength. Her words became a rallying cry for millions of Americans who valued the same principles she had so eloquently defended. And Ethan Wallace? He became a footnote, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the quiet strength of a woman who knew exactly who she was and wasn't afraid to show it. If this story touched you, click on more heartwarming stories that are showing on your screen. For more stories celebrating real human values, please subscribe to Unbroken Stories.